Old age is not the same thing as historical interest, he said. Otherwise, we should both of us be more interesting than we are. Hey everyone, welcome back to my novel review, the Book Podcast. If this is your first time joining me, thanks so much for clicking on. If you're a lover of literature, you're in the right place because every week I review a different book. And this week is no different. This week I am talking about Penelope Fitzgerald's The Bookshop. It is October, so the World Book Tour does roll on, and this month we are off to England. If this is your first time joining me and you're not familiar with the Book World Tour, for 2025, every month I am traveling to a different country through books, which has been a really fantastic and enriching experience so far, and I've had a great amount of fun doing it. Traveled to some absolutely fantastic countries, but this month we are traveling to England, to the country that I am currently residing in. So, bit of a personal one for me. I wanted to pick sort of different books. I feel like we all know the big hitters of English literature. So I tried to pick sort of a little bit left field authors. Penelope Fitzgerald is a fantastic author. I had never heard of her before researching her book for this episode. So that was cool. And The Bookshop was a very, very cool book. But before I get into it, a few things on the docket today, which is very, very cool. First on the docket, I want to talk about jobs, AI and books, because I was offered a job through this podcast which concerned AI and books. Then, of course, I might have done a bit of book shopping, which I might just quickly take you through. Then, of course, I'll get into the book. But first, let's talk about books and AI. And I'm kind of very hesitant when anything like this comes about, art and AI especially, because it is such a very relevant topic at the moment, and it is a big conversation starter. And a lot of people have a lot of opinions. And basically, to put it in short, I was approached by a company to partner with them with my podcast, this podcast that you are listening to, dear listener, to help review this specific company. I won't name them because they're fully within their rights to, do their own thing. But they wanted to partner with me to do book reviews, 15-minute book reviews using AI to tell the stories of said books. And look, if you are interested in that technology, I think AI is fascinating for a wealth of reasons. But when it comes to art and books and stuff, it's not something I'm particularly interested in. It's not something I really want to explore. If that's, the way you want to ingest books, that's completely your prerogative. If you only want to read 15-minute overviews instead of reading the actual book, that's absolutely your prerogative to do so. I'm not going to stop that at all. But when it comes to me and my podcast, that's not something I want to do. And so I did politely decline, even though the money they were offering was decent. I mean, this is a free book podcast, and I want it to remain that way. I always want it to remain free. But it is interesting when you are faced with some money and you're like, oh, interesting. So I politely turned them down because it's not something I'm interested in, and I'm not interested in the content I produce being behind a paywall either. I think that's a big factor of it as well. But then the added factor of it being partnered with AI and sort of reducing books from their magical state of these big things that we get to open and read and dive into being reduced to 15-minute videos is not something I'm particularly interested in, despite the fact that I have a book podcast that does more or less that. But I am not AI. None of this is AI generated. This is all just the mindless, mad ramblings of me. So let's keep those ramblings going. I was recently on a little trip to Amsterdam to visit some family. My grandmother was born in Amsterdam, and so I was visiting some family there. She grew up there. She lived through Germany or Nazi-occupied Amsterdam. Very frightening time, of course, but she's got some interesting stories to tell from that time. She's got one really cool story that I'll briefly touch on now, actually. It involves, I'll give you a little overview because I might talk about it in a later podcast episode, but it involves her father, my great-grandfather, breaking curfew in Nazi-occupied Amsterdam to try and get food for his family, being caught by Nazis, and then, well, let's just say there was a bit of late-night dentistry that went on, and I'll leave it there. So I was in Amsterdam, and I went to a few different bookshops. The first book I bought was Percival, Everett, The Trees. I read James by Percival Everett the other week, and it was an absolutely fantastic book. It was longlisted or shortlisted for the Booker, and it was an absolutely phenomenal book. I would genuinely recommend it. I haven't done an episode on it, and I don't plan to just yet, for no particular reason other than I've got other books that I need to do in the schedule of the podcast, but I think I will absolutely be bringing you that episode because it was a really, really interesting story. And so when I saw Percival Everett's names, I thought, yeah, I quite liked him as a writer. I'd like to see more of what he has to offer. So The Trees looks really interesting as well. Then I turned my attention to a few Dutch books. This is by Gerard Revé, or Rev, I'm not too sure how to pronounce it. It's called The Evenings. It looks really interesting. It kind of looks a bit Camus-esque in that it's about this guy who tells jokes and wanders the streets, and it feels a bit kind of like Outsider, The Stranger, The Outsider, whichever edition you have. Kind of a guy like that, just wandering these streets and telling sort of darkly comedic but truthful tales of his life and making keen observations to the world that he lives in a very absurdist kind of way. So that looks kind of fun. The next book I bought was Midnight Blue by Simone van der Vlucht. It looks cool. I mean, a bit of historical fiction about a woman that is widowed, and then she sort of has to navigate that situation in her life. In 17th century Holland, a young widow discovers a rare opportunity for a new life. I mean, that sounds absolutely fascinating. The cover I really love, the blues and whites, and yeah, a bit of historical fiction. You can never go wrong. The next book I bought, I really did buy a few. The Assault by Harry Muselich. This looks really interesting, and the reason I bought this is because it's about Amsterdam during Nazi-occupied Amsterdam, and it looks really fascinating, and I think it will be extra interesting knowing that my grandmother was in Amsterdam at this specific time and could be, potentially a side character or was experiencing things that these characters were going through. So I think that adds a bit of emotional weight to it and should make for a very, very fascinating and quite introspective read for me. So that's very cool. And then lastly, I went to the Van Gogh Museum because he's one of my favorite artists, authors as well, because his skill with the pencil was absolutely phenomenal. He's a very, very good writer, and I bought a book of his letters. I asked, is this all the letters? And they said, no, all the letters takes up, I think it was 6 to 8 volumes of books that you can buy, but I didn't want to buy that many because they didn't have it on offer, and I don't really need 6 huge volumes of his letters. Well, I do kind of need it, but I don't have a space for it at the moment. So this is like a curated by the Van Gogh Museum itself. It looks really cool. I'm really keen to get stuck into that one. So that was a bit of book shopping I did. Some great books on the horizon on the to be read pile, definitely coming up. Okay, on with the main book, the main reason we're here today, The Bookshop by Penelope Fitzgerald. Really, really fascinating book. Short, but punchy, absolutely punchy. Very different to what I was expecting. I sort of bought this book. I'll do a brief overview actually. It's about a woman who buys a book with a bit of her inheritance money. She's not incredibly wealthy. She's kind of like throwing all her eggs more or less into this basket of opening a bookshop, into this dream of owning a bookshop. And she finds a place in this small town, buys this place that is a dilapidated old building to create and curate this bookshop for the town, and more or less the town rejects it. And when I read the blurb for it, I thought, oh, fantastic. It's going to be this really, really charming story about a woman and her bookshop that are initially rejected by this town. And then she, through the nature of books and art and literature, she wins over the town and everyone's happy. And it's this really charming, nice, country, cozy story as the weather starts to change here in England and starts to get a little bit colder. A nice, cozy story like that is exactly what I was after. It is not like that at all. It is a very dark story, actually. It's incredibly sad. It's incredibly melancholic. It feels incredibly real, and I think it speaks a lot to the nature of humans, mob mentality, ethics, morals, capitalism. There is a hell of a lot that goes on between the pages. It is only 150 pages long. It is pretty sparse in the way it's written. It's not overwritten at all, but damn, it packs a punch. What I think I loved most about it was it is an incredibly quiet novel. It's never shouting at you. It's never trying to force something down your throat. It simply just presents these situations and you as the reader just sort of take from them what you can. It's incredibly quiet, and that's a huge part of it because you come to this, quiet, sleepy English town and you think it's quiet and quaint and really, really nice and really, really beautiful, and everyone's going to be this charming kind of little country situation where everyone knows everyone and everyone's really friendly to everyone. People are sharing cups of tea and sugar and milk and all these things that you kind of dream of in this idyllic lifestyle. And it is incredibly quiet like that, but it is a quiet that makes you realize that just because something is quiet doesn't mean that it's actually really nice. Just because something is silent, just because something is quiet doesn't mean that it's sweet, doesn't mean that it doesn't pack a punch, that doesn't mean that it isn't, evil brooding beneath that silence. And I think it is the quiet nature of the story, but also what is left unsaid in this book that really, really makes it worthwhile. And I think one of the other things that I just absolutely loved about this book is it's the nature of sort of dreams versus reality and dreams versus desire, and this idea of we're all going to grow up and live our perfect lives, and at some stage we're going to come into a little bit of money and think, yes, it's this is the time I'm going to start that dream of mine. I've finally got a little bit of money set away. I can now pursue this dream that I've been wanting my whole life, and it's to open a quiet little bookshop in a sleepy English town, and it's going to be a really fulfilling position to take on in these later stages of my life, and it's really going to sort of bring meaning to everything that I've done to work up to this moment, and then provide meaning going forward as well. And it just is not like that at all. And I think that's sort of what I loved about the book, because it just completely shatters that illusion, and it shows sort of the best and worst of humanity, and very much the worst of humanity highlighted more prevalently through this book. So what were some of the worst things? I've got my notes here. Like I said, the worst things is the silence, the worst aspects of humanity that are on display here. The silence, like I said, that doesn't mean that they're sweet, and sometimes silence is incredibly damning when, there's a crowd of people and everyone's silent, despite the fact that there's wrongdoings going on, is incredibly frightening and distressing as well. The class issues, capitalism versus politics in this story, capitalism plays a major part in this story. The politics, the small town politics, but just politics in general, plays a huge factor in this story, in the way that politics is weaponized by these townspeople to try get what they want. And then, of course, like I was saying with the silence, the mob mentality of, it's really hard to stand up to a mob, but that's kind of one of the frightening aspects of humanity. And these are all huge issues. And this is what I'm talking about when I say I just was not expecting it when I came into this small, very thin book about a bookshop, but it really touched on so many different areas and layers of society and us as human beings and the human experience. And like I said, it's never shouting at you. It doesn't feel like it's completely squashed, everything squashed into these 150 pages. I think it did it really effortlessly. I think Penelope Fitzgerald's writing style really managed to elucidate a lot of these themes and thematic explorations through really simple sentences, and capture, a lot of feelings and social feelings just through, simple lines. There's this one line where she's turning up to this talk, the main character's turning up, and there's a lot of threat of communism and fear of communism, and she turns up wearing red, and she just says, she kind of like looks at her dress and just says, I wish I wasn't wearing a red dress. She's suddenly kind of realized. And it's really simple but really effective lines like that really shine through in this book, and it's something that if you weren't paying, absolute attention to, you could easily just miss and misinterpret that. And, it's not going to change the complete nature of the story if you miss little things like that, but it's those little pockets of understanding and knowing that what she's writing about and what she's talking about that really sort of round out this story and make it a really, really deep and interesting read that you can explore on a really nice level. So I guess I've been talking about sort of the politics and the issues within this novel, and I haven't really explained what the issues actually are. Basically, the main character has bought this old building, this dilapidated old building that's been sitting empty and vacant and just sort of silently crumbling in the background for 10 years. And there's this other woman in the society, Violet. Her name is Violet, and she's really upset by this. She had other plans for the building. She always envisioned it not being a bookshop, but being this kind of like arts and cultural center, and this little hub for society. And so as soon as Florence, our main character, purchases the bookshop, Violet actually starts to move against her politically, socially. She starts to really work against Florence, because she doesn't envision this being a bookshop. And it's really kind of that childish nature of like, there's a toy on the ground and you don't really want it until someone else wants it. And as soon as they have it, that's the only thing you want. And it's kind of this acting from a position of regret and envy that really makes it, I guess, frightening on a sociological level, because it's that, like I said, the nature of just wanting something because someone else has it. But then Violet goes, pretty much makes it her life's mission to get the bookshop shut down. And she has a family member that works in council, in politics, And so she starts to politically maneuver certain situations and engineer certain situations that are going to benefit her, and ultimately cast out the owner of this bookshop, Florence. And it's all this great, really wicked, evil effort to displace this potentially charming bookshop that has just come into this town completely unaware of the politics, and everyone's really kind of frightened to stand up to Violet, because she's been there for generations. She's quite a wealthy woman. Her roots are in society. She's an upper class member of society. She's an upper class member of English society. So she's got financial backing. She's got a political backing as well. Like, she's got power in different pockets of her life that she's able to use and manipulate to get what she wants. And that's kind of the really frightening thing, is that Florence has bought this bookshop completely unaware of this. She's, thinks she's doing something good by this society by bringing a bookshop, and she's just completely run over by this woman in positions of power. And it's really evil, and it's really wicked, and it's really, really frightening, because it's something that can absolutely happen today. And it's just, people in positions of power don't like you, and you're sort of lower than them. You don't have the financial backing. You don't have the political backing. You don't have any kind of backing to protect yourself. And it's just this, I think, a really melancholic read, because it's kind of like how easily your dreams can just be crushed by the reality of a situation. And the reality of the situation is something you might not even understand at the time and be completely unaware of or oblivious of as you step into it. And so, I mean, I just loved it. I think, once I got to grips with the fact that it was not going to be the story I wanted it to be, this really charming story, I really started to pay close attention and understand just how dark and evil this story is. And it comes to this end, and I won't say anything to the ending because I don't want to spoil it all, but I think it's an incredibly rare ending in literature, and I think it's an incredibly courageous ending in literature, both for the character and for Penelope Fitzgerald herself as the writer, to end the story that way, which I found really heartbreaking and melancholic, but also incredibly refreshing as well. So I think I've spoken enough about it. I think I've spoken around a lot of the points there. I thought it was an absolutely fantastic read. It's incredibly short, but like I said, just incredibly deep, incredibly dark. It was shortlisted for the Booker. Penelope Fitzgerald is a writer I've never read before, but I will absolutely be reading more of her works, especially if they're like this, because, I mean, it just blew me away. It was absolutely fantastic. So Penelope Fitzgerald's The Bookshop. What would I rate this book out of 5? Ooh, it's a tough one. I'm going to say a 4.2. I think it was a pretty good book. So that was Penelope Fitzgerald's The Bookshop. Okay, so what was I reading this week? This week I'm reading the next book for the Book World Tour. The next book I'm doing for England, it's Richard Adams' Watership Down. Really beautiful cover, holding it up for the benefit of those on YouTube. Really nice sketched artwork there of the rabbits, and this is a compelling story. I had never heard of it. It was a recommendation from a listener, and I decided to save it specifically for the Book World Tour because I thought it would be a nice, interesting take on the Book World Tour, like what I said I'm trying to do, and we obviously know a lot of the big English writers, so I thought this one will be a different kind of angle to take, and it is an incredibly fascinating story. Really nice writing style, not at all what I was expecting. I mean, this is a story about rabbits moving warren and all the issues that they face, and I was kind of wondering what this was going to be like, especially for the Book World Tour episodes, and comparing the two books, The Bookshop and Watership Down. There are a surprising amount of similarities, and I absolutely can't wait to speak to them and to compare the pair as well, but also just to speak about this book on its own right. So Watership Down, Richard Adams, that episode will be out in 2 weeks' time, I believe. So yeah, stay tuned for that. Well, thank you guys for listening all the way to the end. I really do appreciate it. If you would like to like and subscribe, I would of course greatly appreciate that. But as always, as I said, this is a free podcast, so I hope you enjoy the show. So today, to take us away, a quote that features throughout Penelope Fitzgerald's The Bookshop, and it goes like this: "A good book is the precious lifeblood of a master spirit."